Hello and welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Alexandra Paul and I'm here with my wonderful co-host Dotsie Bausch. Hi, Dotsie.
Yay, here we are. Hi.
Hi. We have a special guest today.
I know, and I don't know if we need to do some kind of like legal disclosure because
Yes.
I'm related to her.
You do.
Do we do? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm related to her. She is my my first cuz, her mom and my dad, sister and brother. So I have been, as you know, dying to have her on, and we finally have the opportunity. So I'm really excited to introduce her. Her name is Tara Heaton, and she's been an extraordinary inspiration to me my entire life. She's helped me to find joy in the most challenging of times. And my very first memories of Tara are when I bounded across the football field when I was 3 years old as the mascot of her cheerleading squad in South Carolina.
Oh, that's great.
We have
Beginning
pictures
of your
to prove
athletic
it.
career.
Yes, like a little tiny chubby, like round as I was tall. And but I just, I don't even really know. She's a few years older than I am, but I don't really know how many. But when you're that age, it seems like a lot. And I just remember thinking that she hung the earth, the stars, the moon, and everything in our entire orbit. And I still, to this day, think that, quite frankly. She has just a beautiful personality that's magnetic. You know, those people that you meet them and then you're just like, oh, I want to be around you now forever in almost every minute of every day. She's that type of person. And obviously that's pretty rare. But her life journey has been tangled and messy and filled with some challenges that most of us could not even dream of traversing with our head on straight, much less being able to find the joy in these types of challenges. Tara was a top performer in her sales career, but in 2005, her life changed dramatically after her daughter was diagnosed with an irreversible brain injury that doctors initially thought was just kind of the flu. She dove into studying the human brain, desperate to help her daughter Caroline. And along the way, she discovered that understanding human behavior was the key to effective communication. Now the founder of her own firm, Endpoint Communication, Tara helps individuals and businesses get results by owning their passion and purpose and by implementing powerful knowledge about brain chemistry to be successful. This revolutionary way to look at sales and marketing has helped me and the whole team at Switch for Good immensely, because at the end of the day, our work here is obviously focused on people successfully changing their behaviors when it comes to food, and especially when it comes to what is on their plate. Tara is going to help us and you learn how to be more effective communicator in your business and in your life. And she might even share some examples of how you can share your feelings about being plant-based or vegan with your family that won't start a war.
And maybe she'll share some secrets about you, Dotsie.
No. Okay, maybe. Welcome, Tara, to the Switch for Good podcast.
What an introduction. Thank you so much for having me on. I am really, really excited to contribute to the beautiful work that you all are doing.
Thank you. Before we dive into your fascinating journey, because we do want to go a bit chronological, but before we do that, I got an email from you this morning, okay? And it was your company's newsletter, which I get. It's fantastic. And the subject line said, "It's your fault." Okay? And I was like, well, I don't know how I feel about that. What am I being blamed for? Well, as I dove in, I learned that basically the gist of it was that we have to take responsibility for both our failures and we get to take responsibility for our successes, but not to blame any of it on anyone else. Can we start by you explaining why that is so important and so important to be aware of and to implement in our lives?
Wow, that is a fantastic question. And this is one of my favorite topics because it is very easy to hide behind variables over which we have no control. And that that leaves us in a victimized state. And it also leaves us with something that is not acceptable to any of us, and that's powerless. So as long as we blame our inability to make change or to try harder or to get up tomorrow and go at it in a different direction, as long as we blame those on variables over which we have no control, it's a losing battle. So no matter what we're looking at, no matter how high the mountain is, I feel like we have to turn the light on ourselves and say, what can I do differently tomorrow to change the results? And that has served me well for a lot of years.
Mm-hmm. And that was powerful for me because, as you said in your email, especially on teams of businesses, marketing and sales, whether you're selling a widget or whether you're selling an idea, like we are here at Switch for Good, I ultimately need to take ownership and responsibility. It's not the marketing and communications department's fault. It's not social media's fault. It's not the designer's fault, right? Ultimately, I need to take responsibility for the things that work and the things that don't work.
I think that's the essence of leadership and sometimes it's hard to do, but when there's wins, give the credit to the team. And when we struggle, we're tough enough to put it on our shoulders and do it better tomorrow. So
yeah. I remember I read an article. One of my character flaws is defensiveness with my husband mostly.
She doesn't have any flaws, no. But okay.
Well, it's funny, it doesn't show up as much with people I'm not as close to, but I always want to be right. And that stops me from looking at when I make a mistake, because I actually feel like if I'm wrong, then I'm a bad person, which I know is crazy.
And being a good person is like the ultimate thing that you're right.
Yeah, I've always strove to be good. And good means doing the right thing and not making a mistake, even if it's a mathematical mistake, you know? And I remember reading something where a woman challenged herself to say every day, I apologize for doing that. Next time I will do better. And that was a revelation to me. And when I started doing it more, it felt like, it felt so easy, and that things sort of became just a weight was off my shoulders.
100%.
Yeah. So it sounds a bit like that's what Tara's saying, is that when we say we take responsibility for ourselves, that's what we have control over. And then next time we can do better. And there's no fight. There's no nothing. There's
no. And it disarms too, I think, the people that are surrounding you either in that task or that mission or whatever it might be. Because I know that then if I'm able to do that with my team, then they feel free to say, well, I kind of messed that up. Mm-hmm. I want to fix it. And let's do it like this next time. And that's okay. And that's freedom, right?
And it's part of, Tara, I think that's what you're saying. It's just part of being human and part of life, right?
I love to hear that you are so honest about yourself. If that's something that you work on, then that's where I think that's the greatest leap we can take forward, is to truly be honest with ourselves and how we want to show up better tomorrow. So I say kudos to you.
Well, thank you. And kudos to you, because I've heard so much about your life from Dotsie, and we want to learn more about that. And you mentioned that it's really helped you in your life. Can you give us some examples of how it's helped you?
Yeah. Maybe even starting with your career, like your illustrious career. I mean, you were top dog in sales for many, many years in the beginning, before what happened to your daughter, which we talked about in the intro.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you two powerful examples that come to mind immediately. And one I mentioned in this newsletter that I sent out recently. And it was in the start of my sales career, I was losing, and I was very good at it. It was no, and no. I was building a sales territory in an area that had always been controlled by the competition. And my colleagues and friends would say, it's not your fault, Tara. You're doing everything that there is to do. You just give it more time. And I never, ever could embrace that mentality, because, as I said, it just left me powerless and learning nothing from failure. And so we talk about learning from failures, but it takes real intention to really analyze. And like I say, turn that light back on yourself and say, what could I have done differently? Maybe those who were listening didn't get it. They don't understand. They're closed-minded. All those things might be true. but we can't control those things. So if we can just get one step closer to opening their mind, then I think that we're raising the bar. So that was one example of my learning to really become a better communicator by analyzing early on in my career. The second time when I think that I really reminds me what it means to take responsibility is that when Caroline, my daughter, through the brain injury, she had years of seizures. And the first several years, she was on one drug after the next drug after the next drug, and she had become truly addicted to barbiturates. And it was a terrible existence. And the doctors would tell me there's no other. We've turned over every rock. We've looked under every rock. We've looked at every solution. There's not anything more that you can do. And I did not accept that. And I took my daughter and put her on an airplane and flew to Hawaii and put her on a wheatgrass and clay diet and got her off of those drugs. And it was one of the most harrowing experiences watching her come off of these drugs that I've ever been through. But it paid off. And to this day, she's never again been addicted to those drugs and has a much more natural diet. And she's still on seizure medication, but nothing like she was.
Let's unravel a little bit to you and where you were in your life when this happened to Caroline. What were the first notions that something was going on? And where were you in your career? You were highly successful by that time, if I remember correctly, in your career. And then all of a sudden, it's just a complete 180 of your experience with your life, from being kind of, on top of it in terms of how you were bringing home the vegan bacon to your family. And then this happens at home.
Right. My career had really taken off, and I was just, our family, it just felt like we were just in a great place. I mean, the kids were great students. They were social. They were athletic. I was finally earning a very healthy living. And what happened to Caroline was very sudden and almost overnight. She got a virus, coincidentally. When people don't take the coronavirus seriously, that comes very close to my heart. You can't fool around with a virus. Her virus was eventually determined by the CDC in Atlanta as a virus of unknown etiology. But she got a little fever. They said it was our favorite oxymoron, a little virus. And a few days later, the fever was gone. She had this odd rash, and I went upstairs to check on her. We kept her home from school just because of the rash. And I raced upstairs to check on her one morning because I thought, well, it's 9:30. She ought to be up. And I couldn't wake her up. And I started to shake her. And I saw that day one of the very first epileptic seizure that I had ever seen. And today I've seen thousands of seizures. So we raced her to the hospital in an ambulance, of course. And she was in a coma for several days. And when she came out of the coma, she didn't know us. She didn't remember how to eat. She couldn't walk. The only thing that she could do was talk for some strange reason. And she talked and stayed awake for the next 12 days with no sleep. They could not figure out what was going on, but she was having seizures. Fast forward about 4 to 5 months through a lot of rehab, she started to become herself again. And one of the neurologists said to me, he said, if I were a betting man, I would say she'll just be left with a slight learning disability, but she's going to be okay. So throughout, this was 2005, so throughout that year, I looked everywhere, started with traditional medicine, trying to find answers to stop her seizures. And in the end of 2005, I said to a neurologist, I'll never forget this day, I said, Dr. Weissman, can we please take Caroline off these seizure drugs? Look what they are doing to my once healthy, vibrant, motivated daughter. And she said no, because in Caroline's case, her seizures travel across the hippocampus. And that's where she is able to remember and to learn, and where her emotions and memories are stored. And so I went home that day, and that was the day that sparked now almost 16 years of the study of the brain and neuroscience and human behavior and how we learn, what causes us to remember, and in Caroline's case, what has caused her to forget so much. So this story could certainly take up the entire podcast, and I don't want it to do that. So I hope that's given you a good foundation.
Can you tell us how old was Caroline when the seizures started, and what were the drugs doing to her that were supposed to help her but that were alternatively giving her some terrible side effects?
She was 12, and they made her very unmotivated, very lethargic, caused her to overeat, and they just zapped her dopamine. They zapped a lot of her serotonin, so slowly her confidence went down as well as her energy, and she just became just someone that just sort of drug through life.
So, for understanding sake, explain to everyone where she is now, because I know we could clearly spend 2 hours on this very story, and it's of epic proportion, and there's so much to learn from it. But I know that there's a lot that you also have to teach us about brain chemistry. But I wouldn't want to leave it without the audience understanding where she is now and how what's a normal day for you guys.
Today, she is on one seizure medication, so that's a blessing. And about 2 years ago, through my research of the endocannabinoid system and all the comments and the interest around cannabis today, she is now rarely having seizures during the day. And this only happened about 2 years ago, and that's absolutely due to cannabis. So I do think, where might she be had she found this 15 years ago? But she is very, for lack of a better word, low functioning, very simple. She cannot remember something that happened a few days ago or a few months ago, unless it is something so very emotional, either tragic or so delightful that she continues to replay it in her mind until she commits it to memory. And that's how our brains work. Hers is just a very simple, pure example of how your mind works and how my mind works. Mm-hmm. We hold on to things that are sparked by emotion and that are reinforced. And but today she can't really learn to do anything new unless we reinforce it each and every day. And she can't problem solve complex ideas and thoughts. She just can't process those. And I'm definitely sad to say that we still see her continue to slip away. So I don't know where her future will be, but I am her warrior, and I keep researching and keep looking and keep fighting. And she's a very sweet 28-year-old young lady.
Yes, she very much is.
Is it with each epileptic seizure there is some degradation in the brain and harm done to the brain?
Yes, that is exactly what has happened to her. So as opposed to, it was called a traumatic brain injury, but the traumatic brain injury was the encephalitis, which was the inflammation of the brain. What has happened to Caroline is very much like when I talk to people whose parents have Alzheimer's or dementia. It's a very slow process of just watching her brain slowly deteriorate.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain, before we get into more information on the brain, just what a seizure is?
Well, many people's seizures come from one localized place on their brain, and those are the folks that have more of a chance of stopping their seizures, either with surgery or medication. It's a misfire. It is electrical circuitry in the brain that is firing improperly. So interesting that's why the ketogenic diet has helped people with seizures, because all that fat just simply soothes and stops the electricity. It comes with terrible side effects, because I tried that many, many years ago too. As horrifying as that was, I was going to try anything. But it's electrical misfire in the brain.
Mm-hmm. I remember you saying you were like cooking like bacon wrapped in bacon or something like that, and on the griddle, and thinking, I am killing my child to save her. if this were to work, you knew that the food itself would kill her heart, I guess is what you meant,
right,
heart disease.
right.
Yeah. So diving into, because of Carolyn, you dove into, a deep study of the human brain that has lasted almost 2 decades. And you just mentioned something about what she can and can't remember. And the aspect of what she can remember is something that was that she had a deep emotional connection to. And it's also something that I remember you telling me, a deep emotional connection to something that happened to her. So something that happens to us that we have a deep emotional connection to, where we feel great joy or great pride or great accolades, and that she very vividly remembers winning the crown in the special needs beauty pageant. That was quite a long time ago, but can't remember that she has to, be careful going up the stairs or something like that. What is that? What's happening in our brain when we have these memories that we just never let go of because they meant so much to us?
That's right. We have certain neurotransmitters that are produced based on these experiences. So one in particular we hear a lot about is serotonin. And serotonin is that feeling of pride and confidence and empowerment. So as communicators, especially if we are working to influence others' behavior, the very best way for us to do that is to first identify others' gifts and their opportunities and their unique traits. Celebrate those, because that feels good to us. That feels good to the mind. So Caroline, again, is a great example of that. When she creates a piece of art that we think is especially beautiful and we comment on it and we hang it on the refrigerator, she remembers it because she's after that dose of serotonin. We're all the same.
So serotonin is what is in, I hear a lot of antidepressants. It's called SSRIs, something serotonin.
That's right.
Reuptake
inhibitors, yeah. That's the feel-good hormone. It makes us feel good, right?
Right. It's one of them. And the struggle with serotonin is it's temporary, like dopamine. So it's a small molecule and it doesn't last for very long. There's another hormone / neurotransmitter that lasts much, much longer and makes us feel good, and that's oxytocin. And that's known as the love hormone. But what it really represents is that feeling of trust and bonding and connection. So when we build deep relationships that are truly trusting, that feel-good neurotransmitter can last much longer. That's why Caroline, again, she's a beautiful, pure example of our complex brains. That's why forever and ever, she won't forget me. She won't forget her father. She won't forget these close-knit people that have been there. There's a sense of trust that is absolutely impenetrable.
Mm-hmm. Is that the experience? Is it dopamine, or is it serotonin, or what is it that has this, or even oxytocin, where when you have when you're really frustrated and you're really pent up and you just feel super angry, and you and I have talked about this, and then you go for just a really hard workout, which really for us translates to just a release, right? So however you're going to release, hopefully it's something healthy, right? It's not something addictive, but even though exercise is a bit addictive, it's a whole nother, what is it that's releasing? Because for me, it lasts quite a long time afterwards. It can last, 4 or 5 hours, kind of like that after effect, that afterglow of like just that full release of going really, really hard on the mountain bike for like a couple hours, and I'll come home and it's like everything's well in the world for like 4 or 5 hours. But it's not. But
So I love that question, because what you're experiencing is endorphins, and the study of endorphins has really, really exploded over the past few decades. People are familiar with endorphins, and we think that it is. So endorphins are like oxytocin in that they are neuropeptides. They're not small molecules like dopamine and serotonin, which you just have an addiction for and you want more and more of. Endorphins can last, like you said, anywhere from 4 to 5 hours. Oxytocin can last up to 2 weeks. But what we've uncovered here recently, which is really exciting for your work as well as mine, is that endorphins are not exactly what we are feeling. Endorphins relieve pain. So when you're out on the mountain bike and it's really tough, endorphins are being created to relieve pain. They are an indicator of what is called the bliss molecule. And that's a neurotransmitter from the endocannabinoid system that I mentioned. So if you were to take CBD oil, it's the cannabis plant that binds to our CB2 receptor. Well, anandamide, which is the purest sense and form of joy. That's what's being created through eating all types of flavonoids that come from produce. It's being created from dark chocolate. It's being created from exercise. Anything that's joyful, that's what we're feeling. And the interesting thing as it relates to what's being talked about today is it binds to our CB1 receptor, which is where THC binds. So it's it is the most natural form of joy and pleasure. It's called anandamide, and endorphins are an indicator of that. I hope I didn't get too sciencey.
Wow. No, it was perfect. If people can just press rewind and replay like 4 times, that's what I'm going to do.
So I'm somebody who has always felt that if I don't exercise, I might get depressed. And that's why I exercise regularly. And is that true? Am I telling myself the truth that I'm making my own, what would it be, endorphins, and that I need that other, is the opposite of not having endorphins depression, or is it something else?
I think that I'm not a doctor, and I certainly wouldn't even come close to pretending to be, but in my study, anandamides and endorphins are one way to absolutely fight off depression, anxiety, anything that causes a sense of tension or depression. Anandamide is the answer to that. But of course, it's not the only reason for depression. There are all kind of experiential and genetic reasons for that. There's an enzyme that breaks down anandamide, and some people have a genetic mutation that they do not produce this. It's called FAAH, and those people have a tendency to never be depressed and have an absolute. I mean, there's scientific studies that show that these folks that don't have that enzyme, that depression, they seem to be able to escape through life and just keep a smile on their face. And it's a true genetic mutation.
Is there a possibility that we've kind of created our own addictions to our addictions because we are chasing that release of the serotonin and the dopamine? We just want more and more and more and more. So it's a natural addiction?
There is so much research on this topic right now. Dopamine is another, I think we've mentioned that, it's another neurotransmitter that is highly, highly addictive, even more so than serotonin, but it's temporary. So it leaves us wanting more. And dopamine is not pleasure. It's not anandamides and it's not endorphins. Dopamine is that searching feeling. It's when someone's on a video game or they're on social media and they're looking for another thumbs up or another good comment or another level on a game. And so the more that our world has become digital and we have constant stimulation, the more we as a society are addicted to dopamine. So we look for it in all kinds of places, in food, certainly some exercise. But the biggest way to really buffer our craving of dopamine is through oxytocin. It really has the ability to diminish our need for dopamine. So deep, trusting, loving relationships. We're struggling right now as a society because we're not being touched like we're used to. You know, I'm a toucher. I touch someone on the arm. I put my arm around people, and now I'm so careful to not even shake hands. And that's diminishing our oxytocin over time and our anandamides.
Yeah, I remember being on the road when I was racing professionally. And I, early on, I had just fallen in love with my husband. And, that feeling that you're saying last 2 weeks was, it's like lasting months, throughout the beginning of that relationship. And I remember being, wherever we were, Spain, France, really, really far away from him. And I would notice that over the many days and even weeks, because we would normally be gone for 3 or 4 weeks, that I would get this kind of low grade depression. And it took a couple of years to realize what was happening, but I wasn't hugging anyone, because we weren't hugging each other as teammates. And you're not hugging your coaches, and you're not hugging the nutrition. I mean, none of us are hugging each other. And some maybe that mattered more than others, but I was coming home and doing a lot of hugging because I'm falling in love and a lot of other things. And then I'm on the road and it says boom, zap, just like it's kind of been in this coronavirus. And it took quite a bit to understand that. And it did help to get a couple of my teammates on board with some hugging practices. Mm-hmm. It really, mm-hmm. really did. It sort of changed. I mean, it wasn't a complete replacement, but it definitely helped with me starting to feel lower and lower. And they noticed that they experienced some of that too.
You know, a lot of people would say to hear you say that, Dotsie, is that's in your head. And it is in your head.
Yeah, damn straight. It's true. Yeah,
it's in your brain, and that there is absolute truth to that. There's a lot of research, especially now with people being separated, about tapping. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a therapy that you can use if you don't have the opportunity to love your pet or hug someone. Some people will say, well, I'm an introvert, I don't need that. We all need that, and we find ways to replace it. All kind of ways. And dopamine addiction is up there with avoiding the need for oxytocin, but we all need it. And Caroline, again, comes into play here. She's an example of that. She just naturally will come and rub your shoulders and hug you and just kiss your cheeks and express love, and it comes out of nowhere. And it is the natural biological need for oxytocin.
Well, I've heard you say that dopamine is what the drive for novelty and gratification that we get when we fall in love, and that after about 18 months to 2 years, that passion, that dopamine hit, it lowers quite a bit in relationships, long-term relationships, and then it's oxytocin, the bonding hormone, that keeps people together. So there's a biological reason for these hormones.
Absolutely. And everybody's different, of course, but traditionally, and in the studies that I've read about, that early on in a relationship, it's so exciting. And when the text comes through, it's a surge of dopamine. Well, if my husband texts me now, I don't lose my mind like I used to.
I won't tell him.
But we have such a love and a trust and a bond that it's more powerful than that.
So, can we translate this a little bit to the work that Dotsie and I are doing to try and help people change their habits?
And so many of our listeners.
Yes, exactly. Some who are also spreading the word of a plant-based diet. You talked about your daughter, the fact that that what helped her keep going was instilling a good habits in her and repeating it over and over again. That's one thing that went click to me, because that's something that I think can get people to start eating healthily, is those little steps repeated often. Mm-hmm. Tell us about how this research you've done on the brain. And by the way, I want to note that you wrote a book called Talk to the Brain that has a lot of this information in it. But tell us how we can translate it into real life. For you communicate to people. That's your job. Yes. You give a lot of talks. You want people interested in, as a salesperson, you need people to be interested in what you're saying. And basically, Dotsie and I are the same. We're selling an idea that plant-based living is great living.
That's a huge question, but I think that when we first talked about my coming on this podcast, besides being completely honored, it's so important to me to leave with some things that people can use now to help elevate your work. I believe in it more than I can express. So if I could offer some little maybe tips that would help us to communicate better, because I've lived in a world, I've been on a plant-based diet for a much shorter time than some of my family members. And my experience with that has just been so glorious on so many levels. My brother he's 50 and he's been completely vegan, absolutely will not even stand close to butter for since he was, I think, about 21, so a very, very long time. And I bring that up to say that he is one of those folks that has a beautiful way of communicating the rewards of his lifestyle without becoming antagonistic. And I hear so many folks that want to argue. And I know through sales and through the study of the brain and through all my communication research that arguing never, ever gets anyone to take a step forward in the right direction. It's not a route to winning. A route to winning is to celebrating people's gifts, validating their perspective, no matter what that perspective may be, really becoming compassionate first, listening to their viewpoint, and then helping them to take one step toward health and one step away from hurting maybe just one less animal. I think about my friends who've watched my journey, and rather than suggesting to them and arguing with them and telling them they don't need all this protein, I've shared the benefits and the rewards. And what I've learned just in my own conversations is that fear is such a big driver of people's choices. And let's tell it like it is, as my husband would say. People are afraid about weight gain. That is a huge driver. So that's just one example. Our amygdala is where it's in the base of our brain. It's where all of our fear is stored. So not only do we respond to it, but we capture it there. So we have been led to believe for years that carbs are evil and that protein is the answer to being lean, to staying healthy. So who would I be to try to change that mindset in one conversation? I can only say that the carbs that I eat are about, I would say, 80% whole grain. They're not processed carbs, and I am leaner and have more energy than I've been in a whole lot of years. And that is something that people want to hear more about. So rather than pushing that on somebody, people will tend to ask, oh, tell me more. They'll lean in. And then in the sales world, they just ask you to sell.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be really helpful for people to hear your journey, because you have been around your brother, Jeff, my cousin, Jeff. We both went right over our heads. We're just not even, he's been talking about this for 30 years. And at some point, all of the little kind steps that he shared, the positivity, the joy, the love, right? He just exudes love, creeped in over time. And then you made a change not too long ago, like you said. What were the pieces, do you think, that he had shared that then were marinated on over many years, and then there was a step that you took to figure out your own gut issues, right? There was a personal reason that you wanted to kind of unravel what was going on in your gut to feel better. What were those pieces, which are just the steps that I think you're talking about, just those little baby pieces that were very kind and non-argumentative?
Well, Dotsy, you don't give yourself enough credit, because you were also a big instigator in my complete transformation with my diet. I have been dairy-free for a lot of years. And quite honestly, it was not because of the treatment of animals. It was simply for my digestion issues. But I still did not feel well. I was having bloating and, to be completely open, years and years and years of just awful constipation. And I discovered the beauty of a plant-based, super high fiber diet. And I feel like I'm 20 years younger and leaner and more energy. And I have clarity in my mind like I never realized. So I think that watching you, listening to Switch for Good was for me a big portion of that communication. But to take this conversation and apply it to your audience, and how can they, if someone's listening and they really would like for their family to lean in and to take steps towards more of a plant-based diet, I go back to the way that we communicate the benefits. And it has to start with not just our journey, but the gifts that our friends and our loved ones have, and to use those gifts and celebrate their abilities to be able to make changes in their diet. One strategy that I see most often, and it just continues to seem to shut people down, and I think I understand it now more than ever, is to share really tragic videos and information. And if somebody's not ready, if they're not ready to see that, their cortisol shoots up, they shut down, and they just say, I don't want to know. So as I changed my diet, I became more and more open to watching what my brother has seen and learning more about the treatment of animals. And now I can't imagine turning back. But I allowed myself to look at that because I had made the diet changes. So we have to understand what motivates people intrinsically first. First respond to that. And then that's when people are able to open their minds to really understand what we're doing for not only our bodies, but for animals and for this planet when we change our eating habits.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned earlier about serotonin being about connection. So what I'm hearing from you is that when someone comes up and might ask, oh, so it looks like you're vegan, instead of plowing them with what we ourselves are doing, we need to start listening to them and making a connection to them and listening to them and what they want. Is that the first step?
Absolutely. And then not using that as ammunition to argue. Because I think that we know to listen, but it's not so that we can collect it and then throw it back in someone's face. It's so that we can find something to celebrate. So you really do enjoy these experiences. Well, I'm not thinking of a very strong example. I go back to my friends who've said things to me like, oh, I was bad today. And I say, don't look at it that way. You weren't bad today. Look at all the days that you chose beans and grains and saved one pig. Let's focus on what you are doing for your body and for animals and for the planet.
Mm-hmm. And it gets easier with practice. For those that are listening that maybe they're in, the first or second week or the first month of their journey, right? Oh, remember there? And you're so crazy that this is taking place, right? And that no one ever told you, and how is this all going on behind closed doors, and we didn't know about it, and it's really so much harder in the early stages to just take a deep breath and look at each individual and celebrating their journey and the path on their journey, and not helping them to understand that they're not supposed to be seeking perfection, right? It's not all or nothing. It's just all or something. And the longer we go, I think the more experiences we have with people that are negative because we just tried to stuff them with facts and information and horror, and then they turned off. And over time, we learned that is just not working. I want it to work, but it just doesn't seem to work. And then you learn, and sometimes now I still almost feel like I'm just like it's almost I'm like a part of myself. It's like I'm a puppet or something, because I want to really help them to start on their journey and not overwhelm them, but I'll never be completely rid of the desire to totally and completely overwhelm them and have them stop right now. And so it's almost like this whole, like, I feel like sometimes I have this like alter ego that steps in and is like, okay, now I'm nice, Dotsie. That's not scary, because the other one doesn't work at all. But that's who I think I am, really, is mean, horrible, yelling Dotsie. In my, and sometimes I just want to go outside and just scream maybe I should go to some protest with you and get arrested, because that'll get some of that out, right? Like that'll just release some of that.
It's passionate, Dotsie, is what I like to say.
Well,
yes.
You're such an empath, and I don't use that word lightly. I mean, you truly are, and you've positioned yourself, knowing you like I do, to really resonate with what animals are going through. You can't dust over it. So when you see other people do that, I think it frustrates you. One common conversation that I have found so helpful, and it helped me because I tried to go plant-based once, wasn't successful, twice wasn't successful, and the third time was, and this was in part thanks to Dr. Sadeghi, I stopped thinking about eliminating things because that causes stress and cortisol, and eventually people will give up if they focus on elimination. What I focused on was all the things that I was going to add. And what's the number one thing that all your dieting girlfriends think they can't have? Carbs. I am carb queen.
But you're whole food carb, but we want to make sure that
Mostly,
people understand that means 80% for, in your case, whole food carbohydrates like potatoes and yams and squashes and whole grains.
Well, for me, I do a lot of oats. I do a lot of farro. I do some brown rice. I do quinoa, all those whole grain. I eat wheat berries, and those they treat my body beautifully. I feel good. I feel more satisfied. And interestingly, I don't crave sweets the way that I used to. And I used to be a big sweets person, but those whole grains, they really satiate me. I don't have the cravings. I do try to eat some pure as I can find dark chocolate. That's one of the big flavonoids that elevates anandamide. So I do try to eat some dark chocolate, but the reintroduction of healthy whole grain carbs into my life, I eat all kinds of beans and legumes. And like I said, I feel better than ever before. So I don't feel that I'm eliminating things.
There's your chocolate. High five.
Yeah. Hey,
Yay!
thank you. You've heard of some new research on protein and why we're so obsessed with protein. Can you share that with us?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure why we're all so obsessed with it, except for that I did see my daughter. I mean, when I put her on that ketogenic diet all those years ago, she became very, very thin. And it will help someone to lose weight for a while. But here's what's interesting about protein, and one of the many things that too much protein can be doing to us. As I studied neurotransmitters and how they affect our behavior, there are two neurotransmitters that one is excitatory and one is inhibitory. And so glutamate comes from protein, and that's excitatory. So if you have too much glutamate, which means if you're on a wildly high protein diet, you are amped up, anxious. It's that feeling of what you might imagine as testosterone. Well, what handles our extra glutamate is something called GABA. And GABA is what calms us. It's why we drink. It's why we take sleeping pills, is because we cannot get enough GABA. Well, GABA is produced by beans, kale, potatoes, all kinds of produce and healthy plant-based foods. So we have this elevated amount of protein in our body that we just simply can't handle. And it's really affecting our anxiety and our nerves, our ability to stay focused and tension. And this has just, to me, it's another example of, as a matter of fact, I had the opportunity to interview an athlete, a former NFL player, and he said when he went plant-based that he just felt this sense of peace and calm. Well, that's why, because he didn't have all that extra protein that his body simply could not handle.
Now, this was animal protein, because my understanding is glutamate associated with animals, or is it tightly bound with protein so that the protein in beans, for example, would also give you glutamate? Mm-hmm.
It is all different types of protein, but a lot of folks in our society tend to eat too much protein. So it's not necessarily from animal protein, no. The glutamate, the bound glutamate that we think tastes so good does come from it comes from cured ham, aged cheeses. It also comes from MSG. And those things are known to make us feel poorly. But if we're getting too much protein, we're getting more glutamate than our body can handle. Mm-hmm. And it's excitatory.
The obsessiveness of it, I know for me anyway, I'll speak for myself, was when I was eating an animal-based diet. Right when there's just something that unlocks when you move over to a plant-based diet, that suddenly you're not obsessed with macronutrients anymore. We say it now, right? But in the beginning, I didn't really even know, these micronutrients are so much more important, right? I need to look at phytonutrients and antioxidants and the real nutrient density of food. I didn't know that back then. I'm just switching over. And I just, over time, suddenly realized I wasn't talking about grams of protein, because I just felt awesome and satiated and full and energetic. And then it just, when you feel great, you kind of stop obsessing about things because you're not trying to figure out what's wrong, that you're not feeling good. So you just kind of let it go. And now I don't have any idea how many grams of protein are going in during a day. It's just not like a convo that needs to be had.
It's freeing, isn't it?
Oh, yes, for sure. So going back to the beginning of the email that I got this morning, there was also about a 1.5-minute video in there from you that was about talk to the brain language and kind of the difference between what marketing delivers on and sales delivers on. And again, whether you're selling an idea or a passion or a thing. And in the video, you say that effective sales show we have listened and we understand and we relate to their journey and know what their expectations are. And we kind of touched on that a little bit in terms of just stopping, listening to people, being there with them where they are on their journey. But using that, could you maybe give an example to someone who is on their, who is plant-based, who is on their plant-based journey, and they have, they're going to meet their best friend for lunch, right? And they've been best friends forever, and the best friend is, not even on the plant-based, realm, like no idea. And this is your best friend, so you know them very well. You know their journey. You know kind of what their expectations are of life in general. You understand them. What would be a conversation starter to share your new journey that would not push them away and would not be overwhelming and would not piss them off and make them feel like they want to fight with you?
Since it's a good friend, I would go back to truly listening. And we tend to listen when we're really just waiting for our turn to speak and share our perspective. And that is a oftentimes losing battle or a marathon journey to get someone to change their mind. The very best thing to do, I think, to get someone to even open their minds to something that you truly believe is going to help them is to let them see your joy and celebrate what their gifts are. So let's do a hypothetical example. You have a friend who is, she loves to run, and running is her passion and it's her outlet, and she gets her endorphins, and she feels she's great, and she's on this protein diet, and she's afraid that the carbs will slow her down. You could first celebrate how devoted she is, how spirited she is, how disciplined she is, and then use those things that you know that are so powerful to get her to consider that she could even have a better run and a better experience. And hey, let's give it a try for a week. Not some giant pushy argument, but just, hey, let's try this for a week. Let's see how you feel. I will fix all your meals. You don't have to do anything. You become that servant leader. Take care of your friend. Show up with the farro, the beans, the kale, and just enjoy all the new flavors that you never even knew were out there.
I like servant leader. That just hit a chord.
I think just when we share our journey, not to do it in a combative way, but just to let people see how good and proud and healthy you feel. That's inspiring. And you all do that every day. Just let people feel how good you feel. People want to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm. That's how you've opened the door for some of your friends too, is they're just watching you glow and feel better than you've ever felt in 20 years. And they're excited for you that you feel so much better and you're pooping.
Several friends, that's right, who just I mean, they're like, ooh, now tell me what you're doing. And then they've started to ask questions. And I've just simply shared my joy. It's really not as scientific as maybe some other sales settings. And then they'll start to ask questions like, I really love cheese. And I'll say, hey, check this out. You're going to love it. You'll never know that it didn't come from a cow. It came from a cashew. And they get excited and they feel really good about what they're eating. And it just has become contagious.
Yeah. Joy and fun and love. And that's what the base of it is anyway.
Yeah. It is.
This has been really awesome. Every second.
I have loved it. I just really hope that I've shared something that can empower your listeners. That's just the most important thing. What the work that you all are doing, and I don't say this lightly. I mean, it's changing our world for the good, and I cannot thank you all enough for staying committed.
Thank you. Thank you for staying committed to your journey.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.